The woman across the hallway smiled at me, then she disappeared. Not by closing her door, not by stepping back inside, she simply wasn't there anymore. I stood frozen in the hallway. The apartment door across from mine remained open. The lights inside were still on. The television was still playing, but the woman who had been standing there only seconds earlier had vanished. I slowly stepped toward apartment 307. Before I could reach the doorway, someone spoke behind me. "Daniel." I spun around. It was the building manager. He frowned. "What are you doing?" I looked back toward apartment 307. There was nothing there. Only a blank concrete wall. No door, no lights, no apartment. Tonight's story comes from one of our subscribers who asked to remain anonymous. They claimed everything you're about to hear happened exactly as they experienced it. Whether you believe it or not, that's up to you. This is Tales of the Dark. 3 months earlier, I had moved to Ashcroft Apartments after accepting a new engineering job. The building wasn't modern. It had been standing for almost 60 years. 4 floors, long narrow hallways, old elevators that groaned every time they moved. The kind of place where every footstep echoed through the walls. The rent was cheap. The neighborhood was quiet. Exactly what I wanted after leaving the city. My apartment was 306, second floor, at the end of the hallway, directly across from apartment 307. I noticed my neighbor on the very first evening. She looked to be somewhere in her early 30s, long black hair, gray sweater, dark jeans. She was watering 2 small plants sitting outside her door when she noticed me carrying boxes. She smiled politely. "New here?" I smiled back. "Just moved in." She nodded. "You'll like it." Then she picked up the watering can, walked inside, and quietly closed the door. Nothing unusual, just a friendly neighbor. Over the next several weeks, I saw her almost every day, always around the same time. 7 o'clock, she watered the plants. 8 o'clock, her television came on. Around 9:30, the lights inside her apartment switched off. Every night, exactly the same routine. Sometimes we'd talk, only for a minute or two. She never told me much about herself, only that she'd lived there for years. She knew every tenant, every maintenance worker, every shortcut around the building. She even warned me which elevator liked getting stuck. Her name was Emily, or at least, that's what she told me. She always seemed calm, soft-spoken, almost comforting, after a long day at work. Seeing someone familiar in the hallway somehow made the building feel less lonely. Looking back, I can't remember a single conversation where I learned anything personal about her. Only things about the building, never family, never work, never friends. I didn't think much of it at the time. The first strange thing happened about a month after I moved in. I left for work early one morning. As I locked my apartment, I noticed Emily standing outside hers. She smiled. "Running late?" I laughed. "Yeah, meeting at 8. She nodded. "Good luck." I hurried downstairs, worked all day, returned home around 6. Emily was already outside watering the plants, exactly as usual. I smiled. "Long day." She looked at me for a second, then asked, "Meeting go well?" I stopped walking. I had never told her about the meeting. Maybe she had overheard me talking on the phone. That seemed reasonable. I didn't question it. A week later, I changed my morning routine. Instead of leaving at 7:30, I left just before 6. I wanted coffee before work. As I opened my apartment door, Emily was already standing outside, watering the plants. She smiled. "You're leaving early today?" I laughed nervously. "Couldn't sleep." I know, those 2 words stayed with me all day. I know not. I guessed not, I figured, just, I know. I started paying closer attention every evening. She somehow appeared in the hallway just before I opened my apartment door. No matter what time I came home, 5, 6, 9, even after midnight. She was always there, always doing something ordinary, watering the plants, checking her mailbox, locking her door, sweeping the hallway. The timing was too perfect. One Friday, I decided to test it. Instead of going home after work, I drove around the city for almost 3 hours. Dinner, gas station, bookstore, a late movie. I finally returned close to 1:30 in the morning. The hallway was empty. I smiled to myself. Maybe I had imagined everything as I unlocked my apartment. I heard a door open behind me. Emily stepped into the hallway, wearing the same grey sweater, holding the same watering can. She smiled. "You're home late." I stared at the watering can. At 1:30 in the morning, the plants beside her apartment were already soaking wet. She noticed me looking. They dry out quickly. Then she quietly walked back inside. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I asked another tenant if they knew her, an older man named Frank. He'd lived there almost 15 years. "Emily," he frowned. "I don't think I've met her. You know, the woman across from me." He looked confused. "Across from 306? Yeah, there isn't anybody across from 306. I laughed. "Of course there is. Apartment 307. Frank stared at me for several seconds, then slowly shook his head. "There is no 307. I smiled, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. He simply walked away. That afternoon, I asked a young couple who lived downstairs. Same answer. There isn't a 307. Then I asked the mail carrier. I've never delivered mail to that number. Even the maintenance man looked puzzled. Between 306 and 308, that's just the support wall. Every answer was exactly the same. I convinced myself everyone was playing an elaborate joke. They had to be. That evening, Emily stood outside her apartment as always, watering the plants. I walked straight toward her. She smiled. "Everything okay?" I didn't smile back. "Why does everyone keep saying you don't live here?" She became completely still for the first time. Her smile disappeared. "I told you." "Told me what?" She looked toward the hallway window, then quietly whispered, "Some questions are safer left unanswered." Before I could respond, she stepped inside apartment 307. The door closed softly. I immediately crossed the hallway, knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Silence. I reached for the doorknob. Locked. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. No television, no footsteps, no movement, only silence. The next morning, I decided to settle it once and for all. I went downstairs before work. The building manager was unlocking the office. His name was Mr. Collins, a quiet man who had managed the building for over 20 years. I asked him one simple question. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Who lives in apartment 307? He stopped unlocking the door. Very slowly, he turned toward me. "What apartment?" 307. His expression changed immediately, not confusion, concern. He looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "Daniel, there has never been an apartment 307 in this building." I laughed nervously. "Come on. I talk to my neighbor almost every day." Without saying another word, Mr. Collins picked up a ring of master keys. "Come with me." We walked upstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. We stopped outside my apartment. I pointed across the hallway. "There." Mr. Collins quietly looked where I was pointing, then looked back at me. "Daniel." My stomach dropped. Across from apartment 306. There wasn't a door anymore. There wasn't an apartment number. There wasn't even a doorway, only a solid concrete wall, freshly painted. As if nothing had ever been there, I couldn't speak. I stared at the wall, then back at Mr. Collins, then at the wall again. "Number," I whispered. "It was right here. I've knocked on that door. I've talked to her. I've watched her water those plants every evening." Mr. Collins didn't interrupt me. He simply stood beside me, patiently, like he'd heard something similar before. I walked toward the wall, ran my hand across the concrete. Cold, solid. There wasn't even the outline of a doorway, no hinges. No frame, nothing. It looked as though no apartment had ever existed there. I laughed, not because anything was funny, because my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. "I've been inside." The words slipped out before I realized it. Mr. Collins looked at me. "You've been where?" I stopped. Had I? I suddenly remembered standing in apartment 307, or at least, I thought I remembered. Emily had once invited me inside during a power outage. She had offered me coffee. We had sat beside a small window overlooking the parking lot. Or had we? The memory suddenly felt wrong, blurry, like remembering a dream after waking up. The more I tried to picture the apartment, the less I could remember. I couldn't remember where the kitchen had been, or what color the walls were, or how I had entered. Only Emily, always Emily. Mr. Collins gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I think you should come downstairs. Inside his office, he unlocked a large metal filing cabinet. Dust covered most of the folders. He pulled out a thick blue binder. This building opened in 1964. He placed the original architectural plans on the desk. Every apartment was labeled 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 306, 307, 308. There was no 307 between my apartment and 308. The blueprint clearly showed a structural support wall. It had always been there. I stared at the paper. Maybe they renovated. He slowly shook his head. The city doesn't allow removing structural walls. He opened another folder. Inspection reports, fire evacuation maps, electrical diagrams. Every single document matched the blueprint. Apartment 307 simply didn't exist. I left his office more confused than frightened. There had to be an explanation, some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. I decided to prove everyone wrong that evening. I left work early, returned home before sunset. The hallway was empty, no Emily, no plants, no apartment 307, only the wall. I stood there for nearly an hour, nothing changed. Finally, I unlocked my apartment. The moment I stepped inside, I heard it, water dripping. Outside my front door, I opened it immediately. Emily stood across the hallway, watering her plants. Apartment 307 stood exactly where it always had. The brass numbers gleamed beneath the hallway light. 307, she smiled. I was wondering when you'd come home. I looked toward my own apartment. Then back at hers. The wall was gone. The apartment had returned. My pulse raced without saying a word. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and pointed it toward her. She didn't move, didn't speak. She only watched me. I pressed the shutter. The flash reflected off the hallway walls. When I looked at the photograph, Emily wasn't there, neither was apartment 307, only the empty wall. I slowly lowered the phone. The apartment was still in front of me. The plants, the welcome mat, the light above the door, everything. But on the screen, nothing. Emily's smile faded. You shouldn't have done that. She quietly stepped back inside. The door closed. The hallway became silent. I walked across immediately. The moment I reached where the doorway should have been, my forehead struck solid concrete. The apartment had vanished again. Over the following week, I stopped trying to convince anyone. Instead, I watched every evening after work. I sat inside my apartment with the peephole uncovered. Exactly 7 o'clock, apartment 307 appeared. Emily watered the plants. 7:30, she checked the mailbox. 8, the television turned on. 9:30, the curtains closed. Every night, exactly the same. I noticed something else. She never looked surprised to see me watching, almost as though she expected it. Then one Thursday, something changed at exactly 7. Emily wasn't outside. The hallway remained empty. Minutes passed. Nothing. For the first time, apartment 307 stayed closed. At 8, still nothing. By 9, I actually felt relieved. Maybe it was over. Then, 3 quiet knocks came from my front door. I opened it. No one. The hallway was empty, except apartment 307's door stood wide open. Every light inside was off. Only darkness filled the doorway. Emily stood just inside, barely visible, watching me. She slowly raised one hand, not waving, inviting me. Every instinct told me to close my door. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, one step, then another. The closer I came, the colder the air became. The hallway lights flickered once, twice. I stopped only a few feet away. Emily, I whispered. She smiled again, the same calm smile. You've been a good neighbor. I don't understand, I know. She stepped backward into the darkness. I couldn't see the floor anymore, only blackness beyond the doorway. Then she quietly said, "Come inside," before I could move. Someone grabbed my shoulder. I nearly screamed. It was Mr. Collins. He pulled me backward so hard I stumbled. "What are you doing?" I looked toward apartment 307. It was gone. The wall had returned. Mr. Collins looked terrified. "Never answer if she invites you. You can see her." He remained silent for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "I've managed this building for 23 years. You're the 4th tenant from apartment 306. The fourth, the others all described the same woman. They all said she lived across the hall. What happened to them? He looked toward the wall. The first man disappeared. The second moved away overnight. The third, he hesitated. The third accepted her invitation. I felt my stomach tighten. What does that mean? Mr. Collins slowly shook his head. I don't know, but after that night, he never recognized his own apartment again. I frowned. What? He insisted he lived in 307. I couldn't breathe. Mr. Collins handed me my apartment key. Go inside, lock the door, and if you hear her voice, don't answer. The next morning, I packed everything I owned by noon. I had signed the papers for another apartment across town. I never went back. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. I almost convinced myself the entire experience had been caused by stress, until one rainy afternoon, I received a phone call, unknown number. I answered. A woman politely asked, "Is this Daniel?" "Yes." "This is regarding your previous apartment." My heartbeat quickened. "What about it?" "There seems to be some confusion. I'm looking at the tenant records." There was a brief pause, then she laughed softly. "I'm sorry. It says here you lived in apartment 307. The call disconnected. I still don't know who made that call. I never answered another unknown number after that. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up convinced I hear water dripping outside my apartment door if I look through the peephole. The hallway is always empty, almost always, because every now and then, for only a second, I see a woman standing across the hall, holding a watering can, smiling, waiting for her neighbor to come home. If you are brave enough to hear more nightmares, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, and if you have your own terrifying experience, leave it in the comments or send your story by email. Maybe your nightmare will become the next story told here.